Good evening, brethren. Welcome to the Scottish Rite Thursday night educational series. This evening we have Dork Culture, the return of the son of Herakles, the invasion of the classic Greeks. I should always ask about these things before I start, but apparently I don't pay attention. As we've talked about before, these are not tiled meetings, so please govern yourself accordingly. The session is being recorded, and please put yourself on mute during the presentation. If for some reason you do need to speak, you can use the space bar to unmute yourself temporarily. Please send any questions via chat to the host. We'll cover them at the end. We'll also open the mics and we can ask questions that way as well. And then I will send a link to a survey at the end. Your feedback is very much appreciated. We have coming up schedule-wise, we've got the consistory virtual installation next week. We're then talking about the history of the Templar legend, and then we're doing another Socrates Cafe if you were here last week. Hopefully it will be a little more organized. I was doing it a little bit off the cuff last time, but we will be taking a break March 4th. That is the night that we will be doing the 30th degree live in the Scottish Rite building. So we will not be having a session. Just to be clear, we will not putting the 30th degree on via Zoom. It will be done in the Scottish Rite building. Speaking of that, as we were talking about earlier, or as I was mentioning, this 30th degree coming up. We also have the 32nd degree on that Saturday. We are also planning for our spring reunion this year. We will be doing something slightly different due to the fun and excitement of COVID. We will be trying a virtual reunion session starting on May 6th and 7th. We'll be doing 4th through the 14th degree. And then later in May, we will be finishing up with the reunion degrees at the Scottish Rite in person, live in the way they have been presented by us for many, many years. Now, with all of that, I am going to pass it off to Brother Mark. Brother Mark, I'm going to stop share. You can start, and it is all yours.
Hey, thanks everyone for joining. This, if you don't know me, I'm Mark Prewett. I've been a brother of the Minneapolis Scottish Rite Valley for, 4 years now. 2017. I was in the fall class of 2017. I'm a master of the Royal Secret. And, you know, I'm actually brand new to the education committee. They brought me on just so I could do one of these virtual presentations, I think. So we're discussing today Dork culture, the subtitle being The Return of the Sons of Herakles, or Hercules, if you prefer the Roman name, or the invasion of classical Greece. This came up mostly out of just idle curiosity. I am a lawyer by trade. I'm not a Greek historian. But when looking at the orders of architecture, and of course, bear with me, PowerPoint decided not to work. There we go. You know, we have our strange names like Doric and Ionic and Corinthian, Tuscan, and Composite for our orders of architecture. But what did the Doric mean exactly? And it was also, I happened to be reading the Thucydides' Histories of the Peloponnesian War, which is written in around 400 BC. And he mentions the Dorians. So who were they? Turns out there's a lot of mystery behind them, and there's a lot of confusion and a lot of misinformation, or just conflicting information about them. So if we were to gauge this a little bit, we go look at a timeline of ancient Greek. In the 1700s, and the timeline that we understand the ancient Greeks does go on much before then, but the Mycenaean civilization is important for the Dorian emergence that happened around 1250 BC to 1100 BC. It coincided with the end of the Mycenaean civilization and the beginning of the Greek Dark Ages, which lasted for about 100 years or so, until we went into the Archaic or Homeric period, then the Hellenistic period, and the Classical period. And I also added in for the Doric order of columns, they did not appear well until about 500, 400 BC. So there's a long period between the marble column architectures we're familiar with and the emergence of this Dorian race of people. But to really understand that, we need to understand the Mycenaean civilization, which lasted from 1600 BC or so, or 1700 BC to 1100 BC. The Mycenaeans were the first known civilization to speak the Greek language. There was civilizations that existed before Mycenae, but they didn't speak this language this unified language that we understand to be Greek today. And it was a lot different back then, don't get me wrong, but the language that they had was the one that we understand as being the evolution from this civilization to modern day Greek, right? Or the Greek of Homer, even for that example. Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey occurred during the Mycenaean culture. In fact, on that previous slide, we had seen the burial mask of King Agamemnon of the Iliadic fame, who was the king that had, as the legend goes and the Homeric tale goes, he had brought all the Argives and Achaeans and Danaans, the Greek people together to go after and invade and fight in the Trojan War. With which we know, of Helen and the face that can launch 1,000 ships. The Mycenaean civilization's end is a little mysterious. It was abrupt, relatively abrupt. There is some evidence that the Mycenaeans were building up walls around their cities, which usually indicates an invasion or a war. But we'll see that, maybe that was the case, or maybe it wasn't. Greece during this period was relatively uniform in culture and technological advancement. So this was the Bronze Age. This is before the advent of iron weapons and things of that nature. But the Mycenaeans really brought a sense of Greek culture. Like we have this artisanal pottery, for an example here, that's from the Mycenaean period. We also have the Mycenaean written language. It's known as Linear B, which is definitely a modernistic term for that. And there's clay tablets in palaces all over where the Mycenaean civilization would have taken place. And if actually we go back to the previous slide, we can see, this dark orange area on the map is the Mycenaean civilization. And these tablets could be found in places like Knossos and Corinth and these major city-states that even after the Mycenaean civilization and the Dark Ages would reemerge as being prominent city-states within the ancient Greece. The written language, so the Linear B is written language. The earliest tablets were dated to be around 1450 BC, and it lasted up until the Greek Dark Ages. This is the oldest language of the Greeks that has been deciphered. It was deciphered by Michael Ventris in 1952, so very recently in the last 60 or 70 years. 70 plus years now. There is a previous language, Linear A, which we're not going to get into that. Thanks for whoever chimed in. I'm a lawyer. I don't do math. That's too hard for me. So there is Linear A, which was from the Minoan civilization, which was from 3000 BC to 1450 BC. It's pretty much there's a little bit of overlap between the Minoans and the Mycenaeans, but Mycenaeans we can end up being the prominent ones after that, and they're based out of Crete. And it's called Linear A, but as of right now, that language is not deciphered. It is undeciphered, so we don't know what they were talking about, what they're saying. Linear B was prolifically used up until the end of the Mycenaean civilization, when the entire Greek or Hellenistic world was plunged into their own dark ages. This was an abrupt end. Somewhere around 1200 to 1100 BC, this is when that happened. We know this was an abrupt end through the archaeological evidence there. What we're going to get into is how this Mycenaean civilization is abruptly, even everything about it ended. The culture ended. There was a shift in how burial rites were given, which is usually an indication of a new people moving into the area. The abrupt end of the usage of this written language, this linear B, in favor of different languages. There's this suddenly you don't have the Mycenaean civilization anymore, and you have these other things happening, and we're going to get into that, and that is the emergence of the Dorian people. So just to kind of refresh, we're talking about the around 1250 to 1108 BC, excuse me, is when this occurred. The Dorian name comes from one of two places. Helen of Troy from the Trojan War had a son named Doris. And there's also a small village, or at least there was, according to Herodotus in his histories, which was written around 430 BC, that lied between, I guess I didn't have it written down there. I forget where it lies between. It's not too important, but it was in the Thessaly region. And we'll get into that a little bit. But Doris and Doris, the two different versions there, are where the Dorian name came from. These Dorians became the prominent race in the region that Mycenae existed. They were very different from the Mycenaeans, and we're going to get into exactly how they are different here in a bit. But the Dorians were here to stay. These are the people who would stay in this region throughout the rest of what we would term as the ancient Greek period. There's now where they came from, who they are, is a matter of debate. And there's two different stories behind this. The first is the legend of the return of the Heraclidae, or the sons of Hercules, or Herakles, if you prefer the Greek term. The legend was recorded by Herodotus in his histories in 430 BC. And how the legend goes is that Zeus wanted his son Hercules to rule Argos, Lacedaemon, and Pylos, which are part of the Peloponnese region of Greece. However, Hera, the goddess, instead gave the territory to King Eurystheus of Mycenae. When Heracles died, his children, he had 3 sons, fled to Athens, and that's where they stayed until they grew of age. Helis, son of Herakles, and his brothers attacked Peloponnesus, so that whole region there that they believed was their birthright. But they failed, and they instead fled to Thessaly under protection of Agemius, who was the Thessalian king at the time. Agemius adopted Helis. He did not adopt the other 2 brothers, but he had 2 sons of his own, Pamphilus and Demas. According to Herodotus, there's 3 branches of the Dorian people. And the legend goes that the 3 branches are descended from either Helis, Pamphilus, and Demas. Over several generations, sons of Helis and the other 2 sons would try to retake Peloponnese, and most of them failed until his great-grandchildren, Temenus, Cresphontes, and Aristodemus, who were great-grandsons, like I said, successfully invaded Peloponnesus and divided the land into lots between the 3 conquerors. So this is how, according to this legend, this is how the Doric people came from. So the Dorians were not just invaders and conquerors of Peloponnesus, but they were allegedly the original inhabitants. They're by their birthright that this belonged to them, but it was taken from them by the king of Mycenae. This ties the Dorian people to Herakles, giving them a little bit more, I don't know what to say, I guess, respect, reputation among the Greek people as being true Greeks and sons of gods or demigods. Like I said, it's immortalized in Herodotus' histories, which was written nearly half a millennia after the time occurred. But most likely this was a story that had been told and retold through Greek tragedies in Athens and through this folktale and word of mouth. So that's one way that this was, that the Dorian people may have come about. There's something about this, and I was reading an interesting article and researching this, where the Doric people wanted this to be their origin story. When you're looking at the Trojan War, and as described by Homer in the Iliad, you have King Agamemnon. You have this king from Lacedaemon or from Sparta who is going into and fighting this grand war with the Trojans, and it's being immortalized, and everybody talks about it in all of ancient Greece. But the Doric people were not the same people who had that. These were the people of the Persian War. The Spartans were the Dorians. And they needed to have this sort of reputation that they were actually true Greeks. And this was, allegedly part of the propaganda of this was to make sure that they were known as being Greek people. Whether you believe that or not, I don't know. It's hard to say because it very well could have been that these people were descended from people from this area. The thing about these histories, and we'll go into that in a bit, is that before Herodotus, before Thucydides, which we'll talk about a little bit later, these were the only way you really were able to find this historical evidence, if you wanted to read about it, is through these myths, through these tales, like the return of the Herakles. There's kernels of truth within there, but you have to unravel them around the general mythology of the region. So the other theory is the invaders from the north. Many historians believe that the Dorians were from the north, whether that's Thessaly or even outside of Greece, just from northern parts of Europe. Unlike the legend, these people were not originally from the Peloponnesus region, but were invaders of some sort, either conquerors or they were just people who had migrated into the region when Mycenae fell. Because at the same time, and there's a mysterious people known as the Sea People. Some historians believe they came from Sicily and Italy and other parts like Spain and the regions that would be now today Spain, and came over and decimated the cities in the Mediterranean Sea, including Egypt. As you can see, all the way to Cyprus. All the red dots on this map, for example, are destroyed cities by these mysterious Sea People. We're not going to get too much into them today because I didn't have time to research the Sea People themselves, and I think there's even less we know about them. But except for the evidence of them destroying and ravaging the Mediterranean Sea and all these port towns. So the other theory of the Dorians is that they weren't conquerors, but they were just people who moved into the area because all the Mycenaeans were gone. We could see this too. Remember, the Linear B language had ended with Mycenaean civilization. So during this Greek Dark Ages, there isn't prolific writing, at least not that we can find. There isn't these clear evidences of this civilization and these people existing here. But all we have are these artifacts, like this barbarian ware, as the historians call it. Where you have them on the left here is the Mycenaean pottery. It's ordained with artwork. You have your horse and carriage there. Everything has this artisanal thing. There's the famous Lion's Gate of the Mycenaean civilization that's still standing today. I've never been, but I've seen pictures of it and it looks really cool. This gate with these lions' heads on it. But the Doric people were very Spartan, and that's where the term came from in a way, and very minimalist. You have these simple pottery being made. They're not even really painted or anything. It's just clay, clay hardened and with these very simplistic and geometric designs. A very different and noticeable change from the Mycenaean artwork and pottery. You also have the Dork language or the Doric dialect of the Greek language. It became part of what is known as the Western group, which include, as you can see, Epirus, the Northwestern Greek, the Doric language and the Achaean Doric are all part of this Western group, which didn't start in the Peloponnese region. It's very different from the Mycenaean dialect that exists in Linear B. It's really from that northern area, which we can see in that map where like Epirus is is part of that Northwestern Greek dialect. And this is also to distinguish it from the more Attican or Eastern group or Ionic group, which is the other race that of where you have like Athens, or you have Attic, which is right there with Thebes and Boeotia and that kind of area. There's this other dialect of the Greek language. So it's very telling that when you have these sort of regional dialects from this, and I should step back a little bit because I did just say before that during the Dark Ages there really wasn't any prolific writing. We know this after the fact. After when we emerged from the Dark Ages into the antique ages of the Homeric legends and that sort of thing, we do have written language from this region, and it's the Western group dialect, which is the Dork, and they were being called the Dork people from that. And I think I mentioned that at the bottom there. The Doric language and dialect remained well into the classical period, almost a millennia after the invasion of the Doric people. So the key points of this is that the Dorians either invaded Mycenae or migrated into the region, but were not originally from the region. That's how this theory goes, which is very different from the return of the Herakles, where these are descendants of people who were by birthright, by divine or providence, supposed to own this area and control this territory. They were less artisanal than the Mycenaeans. They had this very simplistic, barbaric wear. They had a very simple aesthetic, and the Dorians were here to stay. Some things about the Mycenaeans too that you could tell that I didn't put in this slide, and I don't think I put it in future slides, is that there's some evidence that they may have moved into this region, and I'm just going to go back to the map real quick, of Arcadia, because in Arcadia there actually is that. I did mention that. I didn't mention it out loud. That the dialects within Arcadia and Cyprus, which is around that same area, had more in common with the Mycenaean civilization than these new Doric people. In fact, the Cyprus area maintained a written language that was similar to Linear B, just a modified and evolved version of that language. So who were the Dorians after the fact? After they had emerged, they became the rulers of the Peloponnese region, largely controlled by Sparta. If we speak in more modern terms, like if you had superpowers within ancient Greek, it's definitely Athens and Sparta. Throughout ancient Greece, there'd be times where they'd ally together, but in other times where they're constantly at war with each other. The history of the Peloponnesian War, which I mentioned before, the Peloponnesian War itself, was a war largely between the power struggles between Sparta and Athens. In fact, there it is. So even in that time period, so we're talking half a millennia later, 400 BC, instead of 1100 BC. Thucydides still refers to these city-states in terms of their racial heritage. Whether they're Doric or Attican or Ionic race. The Ionians being more of the Athenians, whereas the Dorics were more of those Peloponnese city-states. And there was a binding point with that shared, they refer to them as race, but that shared history, where even when city-states that weren't necessarily, Sparta, like Corinth, for example, would be another Doric city-state, they would still side with each other. I mean, especially in this history, in this Peloponnesian War, it was certainly the Doric versus Ionians often. There was very few times where these races would separate and join the other allied forces. So that's kind of what we know about the Dorians. These stories aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. Most of the history, like I said, was taught by tragedies and poets and priests, and there's going to be a kernel of truth there. It's very possible that the King Eurystheus did exist, and it's possible that when he came into power, that there was, some people who were maybe the children of the previous rulers who fled, and always, trying to come back and get their birthright. It's very possible that kind of power struggle was happening. Whether it was the Dorian people, It's hard to say. It could be that just to give them more credentials, the Dorics were more likely to say that they were those people, to give them that kind of, like we've always been here, this is our land kind of argument. It's hard to say. It could just be that they came down from northern areas because they were migratory people, and they found this land that had been devastated by the sea people and took advantage of that. It's really it's an interesting story, and there's a lot there. And there's a lot of mystery there because there's so much that was lost in that period that it's hard to really figure out what happened. Yeah, that's the presentation. Does anybody have any questions?
Well, thank you, brother. I don't have any questions on the chat session. Brethren, please go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, Mark,
Yeah.
Very well researched and very informative. A couple of questions here. The Doric column, as we know them and as it's venerated in masonry, is there a relationship between the Doric people and the Doric column? And if so, what are the unique attributes?
I did look at that. Not so much as you would hope. The first Doric columns that are found, and let's go back to that first slide, was in Corinth, which is a Doric city-state. However, so was the first Ionic column. So it was really more of just I need to research that a little more. It seems to me that they were given these names just because of the region. These are ancient Greek names. I'm not sure that the Corinthians were necessarily calling their columns Doric or Ionic at the time. I need to look into that. I was more interested in the people who, as we look at the timeline, was, several hundred years before the first column was erected. That's kind of a point too. The column technology, at least stone columns and marble columns, were far, half a millennia later. Columns may have existed before then, but they were made of materials that just couldn't last the test of time, like wood, things like that.
There's some speculation that the sea people, at least at the time that they occurred or supposedly occurred in Greece, there is also similar reporting in that same time frame in Mesopotamia and Phoenicia. And so I'm wondering, so there is one hypothesis, and I think Alan Butler and I forgot his other name, said that these were invaders from the northern Scottish islands, or there was supposedly a seafaring civilization well advanced in terms of navigation as well as warfaring, and penetrated into the Mediterranean Sea and took occupancy of pretty much everything in the eastern region of the Mediterranean. So there's some overlapping historical data that speaks to our potentially sea people or seafaring people being the cause of and being the origin of the Dork people.
There was some thought on that. So the sea people were definitely technologically advanced, because around this time period of the Dorian emergence here, that's the end of the Bronze Age and the beginning of the Iron Age. So you have this evidence of people with iron weapons coming in and just decimating it. The Dork people, and this is where there's some disagreement on that point, is that the belief is that they came from land from the north, so, and not necessarily from the sea, because the sea people attacked if they were attacking Greece, which I actually think they were, because they were also, like you said, Mesopotamia and the Phoenicians, is that they were attacking from the Mediterranean, which would have been that southern part. And those were also the city-states that were building up their walls, preparing for battle. But because the dialect of the Dorians came from that, like Thessaly, Epirus, which is, if we were looking at this map, which doesn't list them, I don't know if I can
Thought you had another map
Perfect.
with the
I
name.
did have a better one. Let's go further. There we go. Or a dialect one. That's even better. So you have Epirus up in the Upper Peninsula there. You have, I'm trying to do this with my touchpad and it's not working very well. And Thessaly, you know, this is where their language was coming from, and then they moved further south. It's still possible they were sea people, but they did have that Greek dialect at least. You know, instead of having maybe something from that region of the Scottish Highlands. But who knows? That's the problem with this, is that there's not really like a record that says, hey, these people, you know, they're not writing about it. You know, what we have to go by are these legends and what somebody said half a millennia later, and then also from these just what archaeological records we can find, like the burial rites changes, which I didn't go too much into because I don't know too much about it. But you could tell from looking at the burial grounds in the Dark Ages versus Mycenaean civilization that it's just drastically different. So they were drastically different people. Just how drastic? That's the question.
I have a question about the pillars.
Yeah.
Obviously, we have names, and the names correlate to various countries or regions at this time. But is that our doing, or do we know enough to know if they were really invented or made in their final form in the Doric area, for example, or the Ionic area, or did they come at different times and then cross over? Also, can you tell, how hard is it to tell if a pillar is far older than another one?
Yeah, that's a fair question. I'm not an archaeologist. I couldn't tell you how they could tell.
Sorry, I didn't want to put you on the spot.
Yeah, I wish I had that answer for you.
These questions can go out to all the brothers.
You know,
I don't know what they did. We do know how they're identified, classified, but that may be all we ever know.
As far as I could tell, I don't know how archaeologists are able to tell what time these columns are necessarily coming from, but the oldest ones for the Doric or for the Ionic columns are around the Corinth area. That's where they were making these columns, at least the earliest ones we can find that are still standing in some form. I don't know how you tell. Maybe there's other clues around it.
I have a brother who looks at pieces of stone and looks at how they have decayed over the centuries and uses that as a way to give an approximate dating of the working of the stone. And maybe that's really the only way. Also, sometimes they know it came from a certain quarry nearby, and they may have a record of when that quarry was used. And they usually do run out. Therefore, you can say, well, can't be after this time. They were out of stone. Things like that. So I don't really know. I'm speaking off the top of my head and things that I've picked up over the years, but I am no expert either. So I thank you for your efforts, and I know how hard it is to get all the information. You're covering a very important and large area. It's very difficult to have it all ready in a time frame of presenting this. So I don't want to make you feel bad or anything. We could do all this.
Well,
nobody has.
I knew I had 30 minutes to kill, so I built a 30-minute presentation and my knowledge around what I could present during the 30-minute time. I've actually thought about that, having maybe another presentation in the future where I actually do some more research on the columns themselves, on the archaeological aspect of that, because I actually think there's probably more information on how we can tell when a column was built than the Doric people themselves.
No, this map I like. I have not seen one where I could get a feeling for all these countries and areas where peoples lived at one time and how it changed later on as peoples rose and fell. So I'm very impressed by this presentation.
Well, thanks.
Say, Mark, could you expand a little bit on the what you mean with the Greek Dark Ages? What characterizes this period, and what's so significant that we call it dark?
The end of the Mycenaean civilization was so catastrophic that it affected the entire Greek world. You had a sudden breakdown of trade, of culture, of that artisanal pottery, of the written language. Suddenly, where you had a prolific writing culture, a particularly things that you could just find, like these clay tablets with linear B on them. Suddenly, they're not being made anymore. It's just for 100 years or so, or maybe a few hundred years, you just have nothing until the I characterized it as the archaic period, and that's where like Homer started coming out, and you had written evidence of his stories, and then you move forward, and suddenly there's written language again. There's a burgeoning civilization, erupting out of these dark ages into more of a more of what we understood, from popular culture on what is Greek history, what is ancient Greece. You just had this period where this catastrophic end to the civilization was felt so drastically that you just had this blank area until that emergence occurred.
I'm just curious, was it associated with some kind of a natural disaster, or have you been able to find something?
That's the issue. The Mycenaeans are gone. The Dorians show up. They're just suddenly. I mean, you have like some evidence of migration of the culture, but who are they? It's a really contentious part of history is where these people came from, what happened to the other people. You have the sea people perhaps who had to attack them. But you also had this pressure from the north. You had this, it's just, I wish I could really articulate it better. It's really just a mystery. What happened to Mycenaeans that would cause this catastrophic end? This is also around the time that the Trojan War ended. You could speculate that they stretched themselves so thin on that war. If you believe the Iliad, it lasted about 10 years. That you had all these people over there fighting this war of attrition, this siege for that long, and then they this couldn't recoup it fast enough to withstand the next attack, which was either these sea people or the Dorks themselves, and it just kind of ended it. Oh, we got some hands raised. Brother Tim Gaynor had his hand up first.
Great. I've been up there so long, I forgot.
It just popped up for me, so I'm sorry.
That's okay. No, I was just kidding there. No, I seriously applaud your presentation, Mark. It's unbelievable, and it's just captivating. One of the things I was thinking of is when you think about the mural in our room, where that's when they come out of the period of darkness, down on that scale. That's what the first thing that's been popped into my head. So I don't know, maybe that had something to do,
Yeah, it's similar. So the Greek Dark Ages were pretty specific to Greece. It's not the other Dark Ages that we're familiar with. But it's also that region, right? Because they did attack Egypt, they did attack Mesopotamia, and around that same time, you did have that whole area of the Mediterranean, I guess. So I take back what I originally said. Yeah, there's something to that. I don't know if the mural was necessarily in mind with this particular Dark Ages or more allegoric, but it's something to think about.
allegorical.
Yeah, allegorical. Yeah. Brother Joel Friedman, you had your hand up too.
Was a very nice presentation, Mark. Thank you very much for putting it together. I just wanted to comment on the Dark Ages because the question was raised. The Dark Ages actually started as early as 1177 BC and was basically the aftermath of Sea People invasion of everywhere in the Mediterranean. There is a corresponding dark age in in what became Lebanon and Israel, as well as in the New Kingdom in Egypt, that was devastating. And there was a big turnaround in civilization from it. So it was not unique to Greece. The Dark Ages that we're talking about were basically a collapse of civilization for about 200 years in the entire Mediterranean seaboard.
Thanks. Yeah, when I started reading about the Sea People, I was running out of time, and I wanted to make sure I focused on the Dorics themselves. That'd be a good second topic, actually. Maybe to delve more into how the Sea People affected the Mediterranean. Thank you, brother. That's really helpful.
I have
Yes,
one
thank
more
you.
question, Mark.
Yeah.
I did do a quick lookup. I wondered when the volcano that was where Santorini is now supposedly exploded, and they said 1600 BC, which was still well into the Mycenaean civilization timeline on this layout. So I don't know if it had any effect or if it was a starting point to weakening of the civilization leading to the Dark Ages. I have no idea, but it doesn't seem to have any direct effect. Your change from Mycenaean to Greek Dark Ages is well after the explosion, which did cause, they say, a lot of trouble, but not enough to completely destroy all of the civilizations.
Yeah, and the actual start date of the Mycenaean civilization is give or takes 100 years. I've read 1700, but then it's on my next slide, I think. Because of the first one, I said 1600. It was there's not an exact date that you could nail down as being that, but it's somewhere within that 100 years. I don't know. Since the civilization started there, I'm not sure that the volcano really affected it towards its end because it had just begun. But who knows?
Well, maybe it had more to do with the beginning than the end, then.
Could be.
Well, thank you, Mark, for the wonderful presentation and conversation. Anybody else got questions?
I had one comment if everybody else is done. Mark, you had a graphic in there of some people, one guy carrying a spear. I don't know if you can pull that one up.
Was it this
right?
one?
Nope, back. Oh, maybe right before that. I missed him. So there, right there, brethren, is proof that the Greek people were descended from Mound, Minnesota. as the actor on the right hails from Mound, Minnesota, at least originally.
Obviously, the true Hercules, Kevin Sorbo.
The other brethren before me had much more on-topic observations. This is just a way to wrap it up.
Thank you for the interjection of humor for that one.
Yeah.
What a job well done, Mark. Thank you very much.
Yes. Thanks, Kurt. I love that. I actually didn't know Kevin Sorbo was from Minnesota.
Yep.
That's funny.
I didn't know that either. It's good to know. Learn something new every day. So the takeaway from Mark's presentation is Kevin Sorbo is from Minnesota. So.
Yeah. We can remember one thing.
One thing.
I want you to leave with that.
All right, we're going to leave it there. I think that's the perfect place to leave this conversation. All right. Any other questions, brothers?
This was only for Kurt Quast. He was an Osmond member, Kurt.
He is? I did not know that.
Wait,
outstanding.
He's amazing.
Noble. I love it.
I'm kidding.
I don't think so.
That'd be
anyway, I posted the survey link in the chat session. Please be sure to take and submit that survey. It's very much appreciated. And that is the presentation for this evening. So, brethren, thank you again. And you all have a good evening.
Thanks for being on here, guys.
Really good job. Thank you. Great job. Good job, Mark.